It's Electric Drives. Your electric vehicle future starts right now. Welcome to the show. I'm Anthony Algmin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Bob Reese. We created the show to make it easier for others looking to move to electric vehicles, and that's more and more people every day. We're out there using EVs in normal commutes and road trips, and we'll share the wisdom we've gained from living our lives with electric vehicles. You can join in the conversation by sending your questions and topic ideas to questions@electricdrives.us, by joining the Electric Drives Facebook group, and by becoming a patron at patreon.com/electric drives to get exclusive content and help support the show. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good, real good.
So before we get into today's topic, I've got to let you all know. So we haven't actually taken a break of releasing episodes out there. So we've still been coming out with new episodes every week. But we took like 3 weeks off. We had stacked up a bunch of episodes. We often can record a couple episodes at one shot. And we're fresh and refreshed. I shaved. Did you notice I shaved? I still got to get the haircut. The hair is out of control, but I got to get the haircut. So that'll happen in the next week or so. But we've had a nice little break. We're going to get back on the bike. We're going to continue to record some episodes. But for the benefit of our listeners and YouTube viewing audience, we've had a lot of stuff going on over the last few weeks that we want to catch up on and talk about. So we've got a lot of content, even though we've had this continuous thread of new episodes coming out. So with that, the first episode we want to talk about today, or the first topic we want to talk about in today's episode is what has been going on now that the weather is properly cold most of the time, although we've still seen some crazy swings in temperature here in the Midwest. What's the experience has been with charging, with being out on the roads, being dealing with the things that are going on. I know you've got a couple of good stories as well. So Bob, why don't we just start with you? What have you been seeing out there, and what kind of interesting tales do you have for us from the last few weeks over the holidays?
Well, it's been interesting looking at charging speed over the last few weeks, because we had a brutal cold right before Christmas. Mm-hmm. In fact, some of my customers are still down because it was just severe cold. And I saw that there was a refinery in Colorado that froze, and they're completely shut down, and it's the largest refinery in Colorado. So things had gotten rather cold here in the Midwest and throughout the country, actually. And it's been interesting going to some of the chargers and seeing how charging speeds vary all over the place. Now, because we had that break, I was able to charge at home for an extended period of time. Some of it was during that deep freeze when we were -10. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing looking at my car charging speed. Again, I must remind the audience that I only have 110 volt wall outlet that I'm using. So that gives me about 1 kilowatt per hour charging speed. So if I had a completely dead battery, that would take me 66 hours to fully charge the battery. So typically I'll take it to a DC fast charger and get the bulk of the charge while I'm doing grocery shopping or getting a haircut or something along those lines. So I was charging with the home charger, the 110. My car is parked outside because of the hierarchy in the family as far as who gets the garage spaces and who doesn't. And it was amazing watching the charging times, because it was taking me twice as long to charge the car during the severe cold. And some of that is because the first thing the car does before it even takes on a charge is starts to warm up the battery so that the battery isn't ice cold. And so then it keeps the heater going, and that's what was causing my time for charging to be much longer than normal. But then once I got warmed up and I went through like 3 days of charging and so on, I was up to 100%. And then I went out and did my business, which involved going, I think I went 300 miles in one day because I had also, during this period of time, I came down with an upper respiratory infection. So I had a backlog of counts that I needed to service. So one day I was doing a Blitzkrieg where I was driving 300 miles in one day all over the place. And it was interesting on that because I did have to charge twice during that day. Um, One was sort of like an opportunity charge because I had done my normal stuff, did some work in the morning, and I was going to stop for lunch up near Woodfield Mall in Schaumburg. There's Electrify America location up there. It only has 3 chargers, which seems a little bit short as far as number of chargers there. And luckily I was able to check the location as I was driving up there and saw there was availability and pulled right in. And since the car had been driven for, like 75 miles, and in that last stretch, the battery was nice and warm. So I hooked it up and I was taking off. I was pretty close to 50 kilowatt charging speed, which my car maxes out at 50. Whereas if you look at some of the ID4s or some of the Mustangs, those will max out at what, 120, 150, somewhere around in there. And the Teslas would go like 200, 250 or so. The Hyundais, those will typically be up there around 200 or so if they're on the right charger. Now, all the chargers at this particular location are 150s. So the Mustang that pulled next to me, he could only max out probably at about 100 and 110, 120. But he actually, when he hooked up, he was only doing about 20. And I attribute it to being, it was rather cool. It was like in the 20s. And so his battery wasn't warmed up. And then what is it? BMW. The little baby BMW
the
pulled up.
i3s. Yeah.
The i3 pulled up and he was about the same speed. And so I hooked up and went and got lunch at Costco and came back to the car, and I was done, which was good because there were 2 cars waiting to use the charger, and the Mercedes had pulled away. I mean, not Mercedes, the BMW had pulled away, but the Mustang was still there because he didn't have enough to go very far as his charging speed. So it's kind of interesting seeing these cars come in to charge, and then they had cold batteries, so it took them quite a while to get up to speed.
Now, Bob, let me ask you this, because you're talking a lot about the cold weather. Obviously, we cannot control unless you move to Arizona, and more power to you if you do. But if you're in the cold weather and presumably staying in the cold weather, what can you do to warm your battery in most cars? Is it as simple as hitting a button? Is it as simple as, like, I know in the Tesla, like if I'm going to a DC fast charger, I can just say, hey, I'm going to this. It'll just automatically precondition in my car. But I know a lot of other cars, like your car doesn't do preconditioning automatically or
Not
what
at
have
all.
you. And a lot of cars don't. So what can the driver do or the owner do of these cars to have their battery in the best state possible when they're going to charge, whether at home or at a DC fast charger?
Generally, it's just doing some highway driving. In my case, around the Chicagoland area, you're doing 65 to 70 on the tollways, and so
At least
at least
some of us doing more.
Yeah. So you get the battery warmed up that way because, like I said, I had like a 75-mile drive before I got to the charger. So it was nice and toasty, and I was able to hook up and get pretty close to what I normally do in the summer as far as charging speed. Now, it tapers off a little bit faster than normal that way. But I think the other cars may not have taken advantage. I don't know. You had the Mustang. I had heard there was a software update where it can precondition the car so that when you're coming to a charger, it automatically takes care of that. But
Yeah.
where it starts to warm up the battery to make sure it's the optimal temperatures so that it can charge at the proper speed.
The problem with that, though, is that to do it, you actually need navigation that's not garbage, which I have not seen in any car except for the Tesla. They actually do a fair job with navigation, which allows them to then do a good job with preconditioning because you're actually going to use the navigation to get places and to get to the supercharger so that you can charge. That's a really important piece of this because if you're
Oh
using
yeah.
Google Maps to do all of your navigation on CarPlay, and you're expecting your car to magically know, hey, we're going to this charger that you put in and I should start preconditioning. That's not going to happen. And so then you've got
No.
to go and program something else into the car navigation so that you can then trick it. It's just stupid. It's stupid how much they make us dance through hoops when in reality, what they need to do is integrate to Apple Maps or CarPlay or whatever and say, hey, I know where we're going. We're going to this charger. And if we're going to this charger, we're probably going to charge there. I'm going to start preconditioning proactively, or at least
Correct.
an option. You know, do you want me to precondition to the destination, or how long is the destination away? But like, don't expect people to have to jump through these hoops and trick the car into doing something that the car should just be able to do to begin with.
Right. My understanding is the Koreans have that with some of the software. Both the Hyundai and the EV6 Kia. Um, both have software updates where you put in, you're looking for chargers and you hit the charger and it starts preconditioning. So it does have optimal temperature when you do get there.
Yeah.
And, but I haven't heard the same and I haven't seen the same for the other cars.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's gonna vary and it's gonna be constantly changing and it's more complicated than it should be. And what I'm
Right.
worried about in the tone of this conversation, because not only are we talking about like the battery taking longer to charge in the cold weather, but we also know that we're not going to get as much range in the cold weather either. And we've talked
Right.
about this before in the show as well, but we're going to be, what is it, maybe 30 to 40% on the really cold days of, degradation compared to what you would have on a nice hot day in the summer. Like, it could be
Oh, yeah.
substantial. And yet, if you have a commute, like, so like Bob and I just want to explain this, that because Bob and I are really kind of at polar ends of the EV owner experience. That's part of why we do this show, because I literally don't think about any of this stuff that Bob talks about, except when we're talking about it on this show, because I go to my garage, I plug in my level 2 charger to my Tesla, and I drive to work and I come home. And I could do that twice easily on the coldest of days without even worrying about it. And so to me, it's a non-issue, the fact that I get lower range, or that it's going to take an extra 45 minutes to charge on the cold nights in my detached garage that's not heated. Fine. Who cares? It doesn't even matter to me. And that's going to be, I think, more like what most people are going to encounter. Most people are not going to be putting 1,000 miles on a week, relying mostly on public charging infrastructure and in a non-Tesla CCS manner on top of that. Most people are not going to have your use case, but if you can do your use case and understand it, and people can learn from some of the real challenges that you are encountering on a regular basis, and realize that they're never going to have 15% of that. Like, they're going to have so few of what you're talking about week to week that they should be very confident that for the way they're going to use their electric vehicle, or the way they're going to interact with this charging infrastructure or what have you, it's going to be much simpler. I just want people to realize, like, we're talking about a lot of these edge cases that really aren't what you're going to experience day in and day out. Because I mean, this podcast is first and foremost for people who are trying to make that transition, or trying to learn about making that transition to an electric vehicle. That's why we're doing this. This is what makes our show different than the other electric vehicle shows out there. We're not trying to do news. We're not trying to do all this super advanced stuff. We're just trying to give people the basic information. Now, we're also kind of EV nerds and enthusiasts about this. And so we can't help but talk about some of these things that we find interesting on a week-to-week basis. By the way, we've released dozens of episodes already. There's a lot of good basic content out there that's gonna still be there, that you're still gonna find value. And so go and listen to those old episodes, because that's where we're gonna cover, or where we do cover, a lot of those basics. But as we get into these interesting topics, we want to be able to have this conversation about, okay, this is what's happening right now in the world where it's cold, and we're learning about what's happening with the charging infrastructure and stuff. And we're going to talk next week about some things related to how is that EV charging infrastructure working in the cold these days, and what are some of the challenges that we're seeing in 2022, 2023, as it pertains to all that. So come back next week, and you'll hear us talking about more of that. But I just wanted to give some perspective on while you're noticing these things, or seeing these things, or whatever. Like, this is, nobody out there, nobody listening to this is likely to have as complicated of a day-to-day life with their EV as you do, Bob. Would you have to agree with that, right?
Yeah, I generally, yeah.
So the other thing we wanted to talk about,
because even my wife has like a 5-mile commute, or not even a 5-mile commute. So she goes to work, comes home, plugs in, and her car is generally charged by the time my daughter, she gets home at like 3:00, or around 3:00. My daughter gets home at like 8:00 from her teaching duties and so on.
Mm.
So she unplugs my wife, and then she plugs in her car, and she can get most of her battery for her Volt, VOLT, plug-in hybrid. So she can get it almost fully charged overnight, and she can run on battery most of the day the next day. So it's, most of our demands are not that high. Yeah. And that's probably typical of the regular person. I mean, my daughter drives maybe 35 miles during the day, so she depletes the battery and she runs on gasoline a little bit, but she still saves quite a bit, because her cost per mile with the electric is, under 3 cents a mile, and her cost with gasoline is probably 13 cents a mile.
What blows my mind is that there's still no proper minivan option out there. Like, we have a family with 3 young children, and my wife is driving the Honda Odyssey around, and we bought that car in 2014 when our twins were born, and that car still today only has 36,000 miles on it, 37,000 miles on it since 2014. And the problem though is it's been done 1 and 2 miles at a time. Like, it's been, everything is so short. Everything, we live in the suburbs of Chicago, everything's within 3 miles of where we live. And so, granted, I mean, we've taken trips and we've gone longer drives and that stuff, but 90+% are under 5-mile drives easily. And what a perfect use case for having a battery electric minivan. It's just like, there'd be no wear and tear on the engine. Like, that thing would run forever. And I just feel like it's such a missing opportunity. But I also know the reason that they're not doing it yet is that the people driving minivans are not the ones that are probably looking to push the envelope from a technology basis and be the early adopters into, electric vehicles, when the gas costs and a mile or 2 miles at a jaunt are just not going to be that much to offset the added cost of the minivan. And most families are not going to be looking to spend an extra 10 grand or more to save the environment. So I get it. I just wish they would do it anyway.
Yeah, and it looks like they will, because I see Volkswagen's got their minivan, the microbus, or is going to be coming
we're seeing some of those form factors. And to be fair, I think there is a plug-in. I think Chrysler has a plug-in, the Pacifica.
Right.
So we're at least stepping in that direction, which that would make sense. That would be a viable middle ground. So. But do you want to tell the story? Because we've talked on previous episodes about some of the winter prep that we've done for the cars, and I've had a great experience so far driving my 4-wheel drive Tesla with the snow tires in a couple snowstorms that we've gotten. They've been very mild actually in Chicago so far this year. But I feel like I'm on skis. I am just carving in the ski. It's so much fun to drive that car in the snow. I was really surprised. I thought it was going to be a little bit of a handful being a sportier car and whatnot, but man, the all-wheel drive with the snow tires, I am just in total. I'm driving a snowmobile, and everybody else are on on sleds. It's just great. So anyway, but you've had some of your own challenges with some of vehicle maintenance in the snow
Yeah, I
repairs.
had broken bolts on a bolt. uh, there's very little maintenance on electric vehicles. Um, and as such, I mean, even the dealer says, let's take a look at the brakes, every 20,000 or so and take it from there. But there's not a lot of work. So I had gotten new tires in the summer in
Hmm.
August. And so it's time to rotate the tires because I had put 10,000 miles on them. And um, it had to be a green mechanic at the location where I had it done. Obviously used the impact wrench to put the bolts back on, or put the nuts back onto the bolts, and he stripped enough of them that the car was not drivable.
Mm.
And it had to get towed to the dealership because they needed new bolts and nuts. So while the car was laid up, it was actually good timing in one way. Excuse me. In that my battery came in for my 2020 Bolt. So they were able to install the battery while it was in getting new bolts and nuts for the car.
Half
Excuse
of the
me.
reason I wanted you to tell the story is that we would be saying bolts for the bolt and volts driving the volt with the bolt. I'm a child. That's all it is.
So that week, because of the battery exchange, GM actually supplies the person with a loaner car.
Hmm.
Except I was leaving that next day to go on a couple 100-mile jaunt. I don't even know where I was going, but I was doing 600 miles over the next few days. So I had to drive my daughter's Volt,
Hmm.
VOLT, and it was kind of different going back into that car after driving an electric car. Um, you gain appreciation for the electric vehicles in that I had to stop for gasoline. I had to grab that nozzle, which was ice cold, put it into the car, start the gas running, standing out there in the cold because you're supposed to be standing by it in case it goes wild and starts spraying gasoline all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm standing out there in the cold for the half minute or so, or a minute or so while it's filling up, and then put that handle back, and then my hands smell like gasoline no matter what you do. I don't know what it is.
I don't know.
So then you have to go in someplace and wash your hands before you continue on your journey. But the smells and the cold handle and uh, it made me appreciate having an electric vehicle where, like Anthony says, you get home at night, you plug it in, wake up the next morning, you got a full charge, and you go on your way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways too, it enables multitasking, right? When you're charging that vehicle, you could be doing other stuff. You don't have to be
Oh
standing
yeah,
next to it, filling it up. And like we're in this transition where yes, today it takes longer to charge the electric vehicle, but it's getting to a point where if you're taking a bio break or grabbing some food or doing any other task, making a call or something, like it's gonna be ready to go when you're ready to go, and it's getting closer and closer to that point. And that's it feels like if I had to go fill up my car every week, which I hated to do, um, it just yeah, it would feel like going back in time. Like it would feel like going to the past at this point. So I certainly can appreciate your perspective on that.
yeah, and like I said on the trip, the one day when I charged twice during the day, the one time I charged up near Woodfield, and there's a Costco right there, so I popped in for a hot dog and
Yeah,
came back out, and my car was charged enough I could go on the rest of my journey.
nice. So things to think about. Yeah, we're at time, so I think this is as good a point as any to wrap it up for today. But welcome everybody to the new year. I know we had one episode last week that was kind of a previously recorded, but now we're fully back into 2023 and new recordings. So please do, consider sending us questions at questions@electricdrives.us. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that YouTube bell icon. And we'd love for you to join us on Facebook and Patreon. And all the links are, of course, in the show notes. Thank you for spending some time with us, and we wish you a smooth road ahead on your own electric drives. Thanks, everybody.